Hey everyone, Sparks back with another Goddess of Victory Nikke video. This time I am finally reviewing the ultimate goddess, the real main character, the one-shot wonder, Snow White. Yes, I'm simping, you already know she's my favorite character in the game. She also happens to be one of the most powerful and useful units in the game. I'll go over her skills, equipment builds, squads, support units, PvE tests, PvP tests, and general tips on using her. Most of you probably already know Snow White is good, but let's talk about why she's so good, and how you can get the crazy damage she is capable of. I will warn you right away, Snow White is a very resource intensive unit to build, and she is somewhat high skill unit to use as well. So you really have to commit if you want it. With that said, she is easily a top 3 DPS in the game. In some situations, she will be the best attacker to use, and on the low end, she's going to be something like top 5 in some cases. Snow White is a burst 3 iron type attacker with an AR that has a 60 round magazine and a reload time of 1.5 seconds. When she uses her burst, it changes her weapon to a charging beam rifle. Okay, so let's talk about her skill 1. It's a passive that activates after hitting 30 normal attacks, so twice in her standard clip, and it deals 82% of her final max attack as damage to the enemy. Plus, it increases her attack by 8.2% for 5 seconds. This is a very strong ability that will rack up damage fast on bosses or random enemies. Get it to level 10. Skill 2 is an active ability that goes off every 15 seconds and affects all enemies within range, dealing 144% of her final max attack as damage. This is also going to deal a ton of damage. You'll see a theme here is stacking as much attack stat as possible, so take advantage of all these final max attack effects. It also increases her own crit rate by 26% for 10 seconds when she uses her burst. This helps to ramp up damage even more and amplify her burst to ridiculous levels, and then you still have 5 more seconds after she fires her burst to get crits on your normal attacks. Get this to level 10 too. Now, as strong as her other skills are, her burst is the real moneymaker. Honestly, if you are trying to manage your resources, you can stop at level 7 for skill 1 and 2, but you absolutely want to go all in on her burst and get that to level 10. It has the standard 40-second cooldown. It changes her weapon to a single shot charge weapon that takes 5 seconds to fully charge and deals 500% of final max attack. When it's fully charged, it also gets a multiplier of 1000%. And wait for it, that's not even the best part, it has Pierce. This is dummy strong. The key is to manually aim with it. The burst actually has a pretty big area of effect compared to a normal sniper shot, so when bosses have multiple parts, you can aim right between them and pierce 2, 3, even 4 at once. With the proper build, this allows her to deal upwards of 50 million damage or more in a single shot. Okay, so let's talk about how you can actually get this to happen. Oh, and for those of you that are new to her, remember, she will not charge her burst while she is in cover. So for cubes, honestly, just give her whatever your highest level cube is. You want to give her as much stats as possible. In theory, charge damage cube is going to be best, but most people won't have that cube invested. You could also do charge speed cube, but go with bastion or resilience and call it a day. Like I said, just build as much stats as you can. I know many people are starving for Pilgrim gear, but if you want to use Snow White, give everything you can to her and overload it. Go all in on level 5 too. Obviously, the helmet is the best. Again, I'll restate that stacking attack stat is the name of the game here. So for overload effects, attack is king. Second best is elemental damage. In raids, this will give you a huge damage buff when fighting bosses weak to iron. After those two, the drop off of importance is pretty big, but charge speed is helpful. The quicker you can get her burst off, the better. This can make timing it with some support unit buffs easier. Charge damage is pretty good. Ammo is never bad either. It can help with her skill 1. Crit rate can reduce headaches if you're molding, but I personally prefer crit damage. Hit rate is pretty mid, and defense is probably the worst. Alright, now let's talk about squads. But real quick, if you like Nikke videos, hitting that sub button would help me a lot. I stream and make Nikke videos every week. So having the proper support units for Snow White is arguably even more important than the build on Snow White herself. There are many different options, and you can change things depending on if you are raiding, doing interceptions, going all in, or need to be more sustainable. So first, let's talk about what she is probably most famous for, the all-in one-shot interception squad. This is my favorite version of it. Obviously, you have Snow White, then Winter Fairy Anne is your burst 2 buffer that most people actually don't have, but her burst gives one of the biggest attack buffs in the game. At level 10, it increases all attacker units' attack by a crazy 77% for 10 seconds. Maxwell is one of the most important and irreplaceable units for one-shotting bosses because her skill 1 increases Snow White's charge speed and attack for 10 seconds by a large amount. Miranda is the quintessential burst 1 for Snow White, although there are some spicy alternatives we'll talk about in a bit. Her skill 2 increases everyone's critical damage, and her burst increases the highest attack allies' attack by 40% for 10 seconds. Something to keep in mind with many of these buffer units is that a lot of them give the buff to the highest attack ally. So ideally your Snow White is fully built and she's automatically the highest attack, but this is something you'll want to be careful with when building your squads. It can be hard to get Pilgrim duplicates and Pilgrim gear, so you could accidentally overbuild some support units like Maxwell and actually steal the buffs from Snow White. The last teammate is Yulha, because she also has a huge attack buff for all allies. Even at level 1, it's 53%, so you probably don't even need to invest in it. The tricky thing is that it is an active buff that goes off every 30 seconds. It also lasts for only 5 seconds, and remember, it takes 5 seconds to fully charge Snow White. So you need to watch the battle timer up in the corner and start bursting a second or two before the 30-second mark. That way, when Yulha goes off, you'll be ready to fire and vaporize the boss. If you don't have Anne, a great replacement is Polly. She was actually the original burst 2 that most people used before Anne was released, and another good option is Yulha or Privity, or if you have enough limit breaks or cords, you might not even need Maxwell necessarily, and you could replace her with Privity. Snow White is more than just a one-shot gimmick against interceptions, so let's take a look at some alternative teams that can be highly effective in Union Raid and Solo Raid. The simplest change is to take out your third burst 3 and add Dola. So Anne and Polly, if you're using her, have long cooldowns, so you need a second burst 2. Dola will give you the cooldown reduction and yet another attack buff on both her skill 1 and 2. You might also be using Maxwell on your Alice team, so don't forget Privity is an option, but maybe you're using her with Alice or Summer and East too. So a great option is Helm, who will again give Snow White an attack buff, but will also give you healing, which can be important sometimes in really difficult fights. As a side note, Anne can give you a clutch revive sometimes too. So another completely different comp uses bunnies. Bunnies are good everywhere, right? Noir can actually be a stand-in pretty much anywhere. I mentioned Yulha and Privity already if you need to, but she provides a decent attack buff, but the full bunny team looks something like this. Blanc will provide heals, of course, plus she gives a debuff similar to Novel that makes the boss take extra damage. The key thing is her debuff lasts for 10 seconds, whereas Novel is super difficult to use because it only lasts 5 seconds, even though it is an even greater debuff. Usually you won't get off the shot in time. That's also a problem with Leader, who gives a big attack buff, but it only lasts for 5 seconds and doesn't really help Snow White. Remember, if you need Maxwell elsewhere, I'd maybe drop in Yulha for this comp. There are some other really wonky looking teams that can work depending on how you need to move things around for your solo raid. Remember, as I said in my solo raid guide, link to that in the description below if you want to check that out too. There are many paths to success in a raid and you need to be creative. But yeah, you can do this with Rapunzel. You can even go with something like this. It's not really ideal, but I have seen this be surprisingly pretty effective depending on the boss. Perhaps the best raid team with Snow White now is Tia, Volume, Naga, Snow White, and Maxwell. This was super good in the last raid. Tia and Naga are really strong utility units that give sustainability and big damage buffs. Sort of similar idea to bunnies, but they go about it in a much different way. I did a full review on them too, so link to that video in the description below for after you finish this video, but they can make Snow White and Maxwell's core hits ridiculous, and volume will boost your crits as well as give you the all-important cooldown reduction. If you're fighting a boss that's also has parts, Dorothy can actually be really effective here in this team too. She will give you cooldown reduction, increase the damage Snow White will do to parts by a huge 50%, and of course just do a ton of damage on her own. Lastly, I want to mention Red Hood. She's brand new and we're still testing her, but I've already done some fun stuff with her and Snow White. She can be a potential burst 1 replacement for Miranda in the one-shot squad with her insane 75% attack buff. She also has potential to be a raid teammate as a burst 3. You know, they both are heavy hitter iron types, and they also both really benefit from Maxwell. Another tip I want to give you is positioning matters. It can be a lot easier to hit multiple parts of the bosses just by putting Snow White at the right angle to pierce the most parts possible. For instance, on the train, I like to put her all the way to the left so I have as much angle as possible to hit turrets and the launcher coming up on the right. In PvP, that's where everything goes bad. Do not use Snow White in PvP. Technically, she can one-shot any unit, but sitting there charging for 5 seconds without shooting is a great way to just die before you ever get the shot off. I've tried various stall teams, but it's just not worth it. She is inferior to so many other burst 3s in Arena, and her burst generation just isn't good either. Snow White is a god in union raids, solo raids, interception, basically anytime you're fighting a boss. She's also really helpful on some stages of the Pilgrim Tower to give you some extra DPS and push even if you're really under CP. She has a surprising amount of team comps that work with her, and she's gotten even better and more flexible since Tia and Naga came out. She scales extremely well with investment, so instead of getting diminishing returns like you do on some units, go all in and she'll get even better the more you build her. So her biggest downside is that she is not really easy to use and takes a long time to become effective. New players won't be able to get good results with her. However, if you take the time, she will be one of the best units in the game, and even after a full year since launch, and I bet she will be good for another year. Lastly, I'd like to show you some charts that track the percentage of how often a unit is used in the top ranking players of raids. I didn't make these spreadsheets and I actually don't know who's responsible for them, but you can find them frequently posted on Reddit and other community forums. If you are or know the original source, please let me know. Anyway, you can see Snow White is always there. So if you want to go for a high score or wreck some bosses, Snow White is worth. Hopefully this helped you on using her, or at least understanding how she works a bit better. And let's go ahead and finish this off by opening a mold. If you stuck around this long, you're a legend. Let's go ahead and just open up this purple mold. Viper! My mold streak continues. I think that's my first copy of Viper actually, so limit break 1. Alright, sub for more Nikke videos. Don't forget to check out those links down below for more information. If you want to support the channel directly, consider joining with a membership for extra perks, and I'll see you on stream.